Come my gamer here, and I do day for Mondays around chapter 4. Make a Bushnell. Left Bushnell. Lieutenant Richard and Tara. The prisoner of war camp reeked from the smell of raw sewage. Ditches, fences, and barbed wire ranged the perimeter. So did stone fence paste. Japanese guards, some wielding rifles, others carrying bamboo canes to beat prisoners. Carved out of the jungle near the port city of Makassar on the Indonesian island of Salui, the compound was dotted with hundreds of open-sized bamboo huts lined with wooden burnt down each side. There were the captives' quarters in the main area. More than 2,000 prisoners, American, British, Australian, and Dutch pilots, sailors, and soldiers, milled around in their tattered, sweat-stained clothes and bare feet. They looked hungry and worried. Jumped off one of the prison trucks that rumbled to a stop in front of the camp. U.S. Navy Lieutenant Richard Anthony waited for the rest of his group, 150 captured sailors from the USS POW. Gentlemen, he said gravely, welcome to your new home. It's not exactly the Ritz, clicked Lieutenant Ben Wilson. No one laughed. No talking, snapped a Japanese officer, following orders from his captors. Antrim marched his men into the compound, their heads high in a show of naval pride as the gate closed behind them. Each man wondered when or if he would ever return home. Prepare yourselves for the worst, Antrim warned the men. Their only way to survive. Ouch! The officer dropped one knee after a guard whacked him hard on the back with a long cane and hissed, no talking. Like each new prisoner, Antrim was forced to take off his boots. Then he was hurried to a chair where his hair was cut off with a pair of dull clippers. Antrim grabbed his teeth when he obeyed orders to turn over his wedding ring, then watch his wife Mary Jane had given him and his wallet, which held his pictures of his daughters, Judy 9 and Nancy 7, back home in Peru, Indiana. Antrim roared, will I ever see them again? Antrim been serving as executive officer on the POW when Pearl Harbor was attacked. In the first few months of the war, the Japanese ruled the South Pacific and Indian Ocean with a massive force of cruisers, destroyers, and aircraft carriers. Facing such an overwhelming armada was the Allies' atrocious fate, a much smaller collection of old rusty ships, including the POW, a creaky four-stack destroyer, which the crew liked to say was old enough to vote. The 32-year-old veteran sailor and Naval Academy graduate had displayed cool leadership during two sea battles in which the Pope and three other ships sank the enemy vessels and damaged several others. On March 1st, 1942, the Pope was engaging two damaged British destroyers, the Encounter and the Exeter, off the coast of Java, which they were attacked by Japanese planes and 8 enemy ships. Entering was his fellow sailors aboard the three Allied vessels knew they didn't stand a chance, but they were there determined to go down fighting. The Pope opened fire on the closest enemy destroyer and then laid down a smoke screen so the Japanese could see essentially where to shoot. Under Antoine's guidance, the Pope scored a direct hit on the destroyer, sending up a column of smoke and causing it to turn away. The men cheered on over vessel came over fire. The Japanese ships moved in their three destroyers, which were now zigzagging in desperate attempt to avoid getting hit as enemy bore down the Antoine 9, one the cruiser lives. 20 minutes later, Antoine's heart sank when he saw both the Executor and the Encounter suffer direct hits and began to sink. The 6 Japanese planes roared overhead and dive bombed the POW, each taking 2 turns at trying to blow it out of the water. The flanking Americans fired their machine guns, hoping to dive them off. It was a bomb exploded off the front, cutting out a gun and injuring 2 gunners. Another bomb near the stern ripped over a hole back in the waterline and severely damaged one of the 2 propeller shafts, forcing the ship to slow down. Everyone rushed below decks to the stern, where water was rushing into the engine room and rear components. He organized 2 teams, one to pump the water out and the other to repair the hole. But despite the frantic actions of the crew, the flooding continued. Riding the bridge, Anthem told Commander Rofield Bren that the stern is setting fast. There's no way they can survive her. Prepare to abandon ship, Brain said, as a dive bomber made another pass at the crippled sinking vessel. Adrian immediately ordered his men to all watertight doors and ports to hasten the securing of the ship before the Japanese could capture it. He then arranged to have confidential records and secret underwater sound gear destroyed by a demolition charge. After ordering the lowering of the large lifeboat, Anton showed the final plans to blow up the engine room. Meanwhile, the radio operator was transmitting an SOS. Everything was ready on set at dusk. Roland ordered abandoned ship. By now, water was lifting at the stern, entering the men with a lifeboat. Edgerton up the engine room and scrambled into a raft. Within minutes, shells from 2 distant Japanese cruisers slammed into the POW. After the explosion, the ship's stern slid under the water. With the final gas, the blow shot up and then plunged straight down. With it disappeared below the surface. 15 seconds later, no one said a word. Finally, with a lump in his throat, Anthem whispered, "She was a good ship. This is no time to get snappy," he scolded himself. "All right, men, let's lash onto the rafts to the lifeboat." He mustered to confirm that all 151 crew had survived. One died before the Pope sank because there wasn't enough room in all the lifeboat. They had to take turns floating in the water in their life vests. Thanks to the SOS signals, Allied planes had driven off the Japanese cruiser, so the men were hopeful of rescue before they were captured. As night settled in, Ayrton divided the crew into 6 watches to look for the enemy a rescue ship or a friendly submarine. A flare was set off at 10 p.m., but there was no response. "We won't be here long," said Ayrton. He hoped soon as here. Later the afternoon, the men's hopes soared when the plane approached, but their happiness turned to alarm when they saw insignia on the wings, the Japanese rising sun. The plane over the crewmen, but didn't fire on them and flew off. Knowing the pilot would inform the closest Japanese ship of the survivors, that if they weren't to get split up soon by the side of the Japanese would get us in the next day or so, and didn't say to the men fighting, figuring that they come to the same conclusion with every minute. He could tell they were getting restless, tense. I would say something to build morale. "We will get up tomorrow for sure." As on right, I'm the first man who spots the rescue ship. He snapped his fingers as they got an idea. "Let's have a pool. Everyone bet $1, and I will write down your guesses of the exact time we're rescued. What's one to the actual time gets the dough." Then lifted their spirits the farthest and could rescue. The boat motor was started up, and the overcrowded rafts floating. Men were towed towards Java. Land and still not waiting in. They ran out of gas. Out none of the third day. Ethan tried to rig a sail with the blanket at the bow, then slamming the boat in a certain direction. The strongest officers and crew rowed and raised and built paddles and oars. For the second time, the men's hopes were raised in the dismal afternoon. Enemy planes crossed them by nightfall. Life jackets of those men in the water had become so water-like that they were almost useless. Many sailors were at home. Anthem spent part of the night swimming from man to man, calling out their names to make sure they hadn't slipped below the surface. Several times he had to dive under and rescue a fatigued sailor who had let go of the raft. The lifeboat was now dangerously overloaded with worn-out men. At 10:30 p.m., a sailor shouted, "Ship off the port bow!" In the darkness, the lifeboat's hearing, finally, but he said, "A friend or foe? Looks like I'm going to be $150 richer," cried the sailor who first spotted the ship, and then used a flashlight to signal the ship in a special code. If it was a friendly vessel, it would respond in the same code. "I hope she's on our side." He waited, and the signal again. The suspense made everyone hold his breath. It was so quiet, even the life of the raft. Friend or foe? Finally flashing a light from the ship responded to his signal. His heart sank. "It's the Japanese," he answered, before the groans and cussing of the men grew louder. The older everyone, the starboard side, grabbed a paddle or held to port. "We have to evade the ship." his body shaken from lack of sleep and exhaustion and no small amount of fear. Atom get his paddle over and pulled stroke, 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 then ordered everyone to be quiet while continuing to paddle in the rhythm. Look closer was a Japanese destroyer, its powerful searchlight beam crossed back and forth across the black water, closer and closer again. They found us, a sailor cried out in the glare of the beam. A Japanese officer held them. Lieutenant Ben Wilson, who spoke Japanese, answered in that yes, they were the crew of the USS POW. All 151 Americans were taken aboard as prisoners and transported to the macro POW camp on Sorcerer. At the camp, Atom and his men lived in open bamboo huts like the other inmates. Everybody was issued one blanket which they could use as a pillow or cover, even though it was hot and stuffy. Most men wrapped themselves in the blanket at night to protect against the rendling mosquitoes that consistently tormented them. During the day, the huts teemed with strange bugs and spiders that lift light weights on the men from stings and bites. The diet consisted of pat rice, which had the consistency of wallpaper paste, for breakfast, and steamed rice for lunch and again for dinner. They came so hungry that certain insects became delicious to eat. Their only meat came from captured and killing rodents. No private fires were allowed in a camp, so the men secretly did their cooking in holes dug under the boards of their beds. Trying to stay healthy, just trying to stay alive, was a constant struggle. The captives fell victim to diseases such as dysentery, malaria, hookworm, and ulcers. Anton suffered from all those illnesses, and his once strapped frame wrenched to skin bones. Each morning, the prisoners held a line for muster at sundown and had to blow the rest and honor the Japanese sun god. During these forced gatherings, an English-speaking Japanese officer fed the propaganda lies designed to weaken their prisoners. Resolve your wives and girlfriends are cheating on you. Your family are disgusted by your cowardness. There is no more baseball in America. Start learning Japanese so you will be prepared to when we take over the world. The Japanese Führer tried to demoralize the prisoners by the Daeonappen, a newspaper printed in English and filled with lies, issued every false stories of the Japanese and successfully invaded Australia, destroying the Allies' Pacific fleet and captured Hawaii. Remember, gentlemen, Anthem shut his eyes and read the paper for what it truly was, pure fiction. Somehow, Anthem dealt with the hunger, pain, illnesses, lies, but it was constant abuse, the torture with as a call or sneezing when a camp officer walked by. Anthem did his best to avoid eye contact unless spoken to directly by a guard, because the Japanese were looking for any excuse, not that they needed one, to inflict pain on us prisoner. Sometimes at night, Anthem heard the cries of tortured prisoners. He lost contact of the times he would be woken up from a bloody scream. Unquote. Nothing's better to do than to beat an American to death. Every morning he prayed just me and my men through the day. He prayed that me and my men through the night. Just like study, like in the camp, fear some prisoners would likely not be tortured. Would there be one killed? Anton would to other gun. Get to town. The death. Lieutenant Wilson stepped forward and said, "This immediately is called Pesodito." It means the way of the warrior, an ancient code that demands courage and honor. A warrior who had taken prisoner, therefore his honor has so taken. Us subhumans, they are the coward and unworthy of respect. One day in April 1942, about 6 weeks after it was captured, Anthem spotted a group of prisoners standing slowly in a circle. He heard them raking yells of agony and the sound of bamboo sticking fresh. He heard over and saw a guard thrusting a prisoner as an Australian officer. "What happened?" Anthem whispered to a British sailor. The Aussie didn't bow low enough to satisfy the Japanese. The sailor replied out of the corner of his mouth. The Reagan guard had unleashed a series of violent blows that knocked the officer to the ground, opening up gashes on his head, back, and arms. Other Japanese rushed to the scene and egged on the guard to continue the abuse. They kept a cold one on the ground. Cold of prisoners stood by, helplessly the captured or the person. The guard personally replied, who by now was curled up on the ground and barely conscious. "My God," thought Anthem, when is the Japanese going to stop this insanity? He's killing the Aussie. I can't let this go on any longer. The ruthless anger that had building up inside of him. This is an anticipating finally exploded. "Enough," Anthem shouted. "Enough." He stepped forward, his hands outstretched as they pled, "Have mercy on this man." The prisoner gasped that one of his own broken cardinal rule in the camp. He had called attention to himself. The guard stopped and glared at Anthem in disbelief. The other guards closed on Anthem. He tried to ignore them. "You're pushing him enough," Anthem said. "Can't you see you're killing him?" The officer meant no harm. He bowed to show you of respect, yet you've beaten him within an inch of his life. But where is the honor in that? Seeing the corner of a camp, stormed the center to beat an Australian to the comment, mentioned the Aussie and to Anthem. "They probably kill me for what I've done," Anthem thought, "but I can't back down. If I have to die, I rather become I'm trying to save a life." The commandant spun on his heels and faced Anthem. "My guard says that man dishonored him and deserves the punishment. You have taken it upon yourself to claim your to serve. We Japanese are a feared minded. I am holding a trial right here in front of everyone, and we're judged where this man had received the proper punishment. What the Japanese held was a kangaroo court, a monarchy of justice and which the outcome had already decided against Judge the Commandant and the boat how the Aussie had insulted him by not bowing properly. The Aussie had regretted consciousness by what injured to speak in his defense. Arthur was allowed to testify because he hadn't witnessed the actual offense. I have heard the evidence, the Commandant observed. The prisoner is guilty of showing a total lack of respect for my men. He was being punished when you had pointed to him at them, the guard taking him again. I have decided on a just assent for the offer, 50 lashes. The Commandant, don't say a word and step back, he ordered. The guard picked up a howitzer, a thin piece of rope, and it overheard, and whacked the Aussie in the head. The officer crumbled to the ground again and again, and struck him while the prisoner grimly watched in silence. Soon the three more guards joined, and the brutal kicking of the officer was once again beaten into unconsciousness. I can't stand here and watch him die like this. Anton thought, I got to do something right this second without thinking of his own well-being. Anton waved his arms and shouted, stop, stop. The guards paid him no head. The prisoners grounded, fearing that Anton had just signed his own death warrant. The Commandant threatened, shut up. Now what? Anton, in a flash, it came to him. I'll take the rest of the lashes. The guards stopped beating. Silence fell over the camp. The Commandant walked up to Anton and said, what did you say? Anton said, right in the eye, and calmly replied, I will take the rest of the lashes for him. What would you carry out of this act of personal sacrifice for a man who isn't your nationality? Because he's a fellow human being, a fellow officer, because he is my brother, like all the men in this camp. Hearing the words of their courage, officer, the prisoners felt actions full of punishment. They felt like they needed to show their support for a man who strongly believed in humanity. The Commandant reeled around over the guards to take the Aussie to his hut. Confusing stunned the guards. Carried out their order in silence. The Commandant stared at Anton hard. What you thinking? Anton wondered what in his do. Anton took to read the Commandant's eyes for a clue. Am I going to get beaten, or am I going to be executed? The Commandant walked away. The prisoners crowded around Anton, patting him on the back, thanking him for taking a stand. He had brought him to the mercy soul. Could be found in this terrible camp. Anton braved also from the Japanese. The guards began thinking that maybe American military men were honorable and bold after all, calling themselves a leader. Anton became a spokesman for the fellow POWs and convinced the Japanese to improve camp living conditions. Torture and abuse eased over the next months. Buffalo meat and sweet potatoes became part of their diet, but 3 years later, when the war turned against the Japan, conditions worsened and the brutality returned. The prisoners were ordered into forced labor. One of the tasks was condensing trenches for protection during air raids. When the Commandant turned the anthem, how can I turn this into an advantage. This night he heard bombings in the distance. The Allies are getting closer. Then in the distance him, I know exactly what to do. The next morning his plan was approved. If they discover what really going doing, they torture me first and then behind me, but worth the risk. He convinced the plan was to save the lives of countless prisoners who might otherwise be accidentally bombed. The POWs dug the trenches in a pattern that couldn't be recognized from the ground, but from the sky where the Allied bombers were flying. The ditches were easily to spot and gave clear signs that they had been made by prisoners under the eyes of clueless captors. Anthem and the men dug trenches that spelled two giant letters, U.S. After 3.5 years of captivity, Anthem was freed with the rest of the survivors of the POW camp in August 1945. When the war ended, he returned to the Navy, was awarded Medal of Honor for his selfless actions, and retired in 1954. As a Rear Admiral, Anthem settled with his family in Mountain Home, Arkansas, where he ran a small tour boat business. He died in 1969 and was buried in Alcon National Cemetery in 1981. The Navy commissioned a guided missile fragment and named it the Anthem in honor of a noble hero who took a stand for humanity. That's the end of this chapter. I thank the veterans, and if you see a veteran that's maybe have a tea or a coffee with them, and I'll read the next chapter tomorrow. And I'm glad I can make these I'm glad I can read these books because of what they've done, and hope to enjoy this chapter.